Welcome to LearnSphere AI's Master Subject Treatise on Mergers and Acquisitions Law in India, Part II. This series continues from Part I, which covered foundational concepts in regulatory architecture. In Part II, we dive deep into transaction structures, exploring the legal frameworks, statutory anchors, and practical mechanics that shape M&A deals in India. Whether you're a student, practitioner, or business leader, understanding these structures is crucial for navigating the complex landscape of Indian corporate transactions. Let's begin by setting the stage for the chapters ahead, which will cover share acquisitions, asset acquisitions, schemes of arrangement, demergers, fast-track and cross-border mergers, and restructuring tools like reverse mergers and capital reduction. Part II of the treatise focuses on transaction structures recognized under Indian M&A law. Unlike a single, undifferentiated merger concept, Indian law provides a spectrum of structures, each with its own statutory anchor, approval requirements, and tax consequences. This part covers chapters 6 through 11, offering doctrinal treatment of share acquisitions, asset acquisitions, slump sales, schemes of arrangement, demergers, fast-track and cross-border mergers, and reverse mergers capital reduction. Understanding these structures is essential for anyone involved in M&A transactions, as each presents unique legal and commercial considerations. Share acquisition involves purchasing equity shares or other voting securities from existing shareholders. The acquirer becomes a member of the target company, but the target's corporate existence remains unaffected. This is the most common M&A structure in Indian private company transactions. For listed companies, the SEBI-SAST regulations 2011 apply once certain thresholds are crossed, triggering mandatory open offer. Share acquisitions are governed by contract law and the Companies Act 2013, particularly Section 56, which prescribes transfer and registration requirements. The target's articles of association may impose preemption rights or transfer restrictions, especially in private companies. Mechanics of private share acquisitions typically begin with a term sheet or letter of intent, followed by due diligence covering legal, financial, tax, and compliance aspects. Negotiation and execution of a share purchase agreement (SPA) and possibly a shareholders agreement (SHA) come next. Conditions precedent such as regulatory approvals and consents must be satisfied before closing. At closing, share transfer forms are executed, payment is made, and board approval is obtained for registration. Post-closing filings, especially for foreign investment, include FCTRS reporting and annual returns reflecting the new shareholding structure. Private share acquisitions raise several legal issues. Preemption rights and rights of first refusal in the target's articles or existing agreements can restrict transferability and must be cleared before shares are acquired. Representations, warranties, and indemnity packages are negotiated, with Indian law informing misrepresentation treatment. Non-compete and non-solicit covenants must comply with Section 27 of the Indian Contract Act, which voids agreements in restraint of trade except for goodwill sales. Financial assistance restrictions under Section 67 prevent companies from aiding the purchase of their own shares, shaping buyout practices in India. Section 67 of the Companies Act 2013 prohibits public companies and certain private subsidiaries from providing financial assistance for the purchase of their own shares. This restriction distinguishes Indian buyout practices from those in the US or UK, where asset-backed leveraged buyouts are common. Exceptions exist for ordinary lending in the business of money lending. Practical workarounds include financing at the holding or SPV level outside the target or post-acquisition mergers structured to avoid financial assistance characterization. However, these structures attract regulatory scrutiny and should not be considered loopholes. When the target is a listed company, share acquisitions crossing thresholds in Regulation 3 of the SEBI-SAST regulations 2011 trigger mandatory open offers to public shareholders. This transforms what might have been a private transaction into one with a public offer component. The mechanics of trigger thresholds, offer size, pricing, and exemptions are detailed in Part IV of the treatise. The key takeaway is that significant share acquisitions in listed companies are rarely purely private, and regulatory compliance is essential. Earn-out structures are common in Indian private M&A, especially for founder-led businesses and technology acquisitions. Part of the purchase price is contingent on the target's post-completion performance against agreed metrics such as revenue or EBITDA. Legal issues include precise definition of the earn-out metric, accounting policies, and covenants restricting acquirer actions that could suppress the metric. Tax timing issues arise as contingent consideration affects when capital gains accrue for the seller under the Income Tax Act, requiring careful structuring. Itemized asset acquisitions involve transferring specific identified assets and liabilities, with values assigned to each for accounting and stamp duty purposes. This structure is used when the acquirer wants only certain assets or business lines, avoiding unwanted liabilities. Asset acquisitions are governed by business transfer agreements, BTA or asset purchase agreements (APA), and require shareholder approval under Section 181A for substantial transfer. Individual asset transfer instruments may be needed, and employee transfer is not automatic, requiring separate arrangements. Stamp duty is often the most significant transaction cost in asset acquisitions. Conveyance of immovable property and business transfer agreements attract ad valorem stamp duty, calculated on the hire of consideration or market value. This cost varies by state, making a state-specific analysis essential. The need for individual asset transfer instruments further increases complexity and cost, distinguishing asset acquisitions from schemes of arrangement, which benefit from automatic vesting by court order. Slump sale is defined under Section 242C of the Income Tax Act, 1961 as the transfer of one or more undertakings for a lump sum consideration without assigning values to individual assets and liabilities. Stamp duty valuation does not convert a slump sale into an itemized sale for tax purposes. The term undertaking refers to unit or business activity taken as a whole, not individual asset. Slump sales are favored for their simplicity and avoidance of tribunal sanction, but still require shareholder approval and individual instruments for certain asset classes. Section 50B of the Income Tax Act, 1961 governs capital gains arising from a slump sale. The gain is computed as the difference between the lump sum consideration and the net worth of the undertaking, with assets valued per tax rules. Gains are treated as capital gains if the undertaking was held for more than 36 months or short-term otherwise. Distinguishing slump sale from itemized asset sale and demerger is crucial, as tax consequences differ substantially. Students should be able to classify transactions correctly for examination and practice. Acquirers and sellers often choose slump sale to avoid the procedural cost and time of an NCLT scheme, and for the relative simplicity in tax computation. However, slump sale still requires shareholder approval under Section 180, individual instruments for certain asset classes, and attracts stamp duty on the BTA or conveyance. The structure is best suited for transferring entire business units without itemizing assets, but must be carefully distinguished from demergers and itemized sales for tax and legal purposes. Sections 230-232 of the Companies Act, 2013, along with the Companies Compromises, Arrangements and Amalgamations Rules 2016 provide the procedural code for tribunal-sanctioned mergers and amalgamations. Section 230 allows for compromises or arrangements between a company and its creditors or members, while Section 232 deals with mergers, amalgamations, and demergers. The NCLT has the power to sanction schemes, vest property, dissolve transferor companies without winding up, and issue ancillary directions. First step in a scheme of arrangement is board approval by both transferor and transferee companies. The draft scheme, appointed date, share exchange ratio, and rationale are approved. For listed companies, this triggers disclosure obligations under SEBI LODR Regulations 2015. Board approval sets the foundation for the scheme, ensuring alignment between parties and compliance with regulatory requirements. Valuation report by registered valuer is required under Rule 25A and Section 232, 2b. The report supports the share exchange ratio and is circulated to the NCLT with the scheme application. Valuation disputes are common and heavily litigated, making this step critical for fairness and transparency. Accurate valuation ensures that shareholders and creditors receive equitable treatment during the merger or amalgamation. Listed companies, the draft scheme must be filed with stock exchanges, which forward it to SEBI for review. The scheme can be filed with the NCLT only after receiving an observation letter or incorporating SEBI's comments. This sequencing is critical to ensure regulatory compliance and protect public shareholders. SEBI's review adds an extra layer of scrutiny, especially for schemes involving listed entities. Company, creditor, or member applies to the NCLT for an order convening meetings of relevant classes of shareholders and creditors. Jurisdiction is based on the registered office location. The application initiates the tribunal process, setting the stage for statutory compliance and stakeholder engagement. Proper application ensures that all affected parties are given notice and an opportunity to participate. Applicants must disclose all material facts by affidavit, including financial position, auditor's report, and any ongoing investigations. This step ensures transparency and provides the NCLT with a complete picture of the company's status. Accurate disclosure is essential for procedural fairness and helps prevent fraud or concealment during the scheme process. NCLT orders meetings of relevant classes of creditors and members, with notice sent to all stakeholders and regulatory authorities. Notices include scheme details, effects, and interests of directors' promoters. Regulatory authorities are invited to make representations within 30 days. This step ensures broad stakeholder participation and regulatory oversight, critical for the legitimacy of the scheme. Approval at class meetings requires a majority in number representing 3/4 in value of creditors or members present and voting. This numerical threshold is frequently tested and ensures that the scheme has broad support among affected stakeholders. Approval can be given in person, by proxy, or through electronic voting, depending on the company's procedures. After approval at class meetings, the company petitions the NCLT for sanction of the scheme. The NCLT may order further meetings, sanction the scheme, and issue directions for property transfer, share allotment, continuation of legal proceedings, and dissolution of the transferor company. The tribunal's role is to ensure statutory compliance and fairness, not to substitute its own commercial judgment. Once satisfied with the scheme's fairness and statutory compliance, the NCLT sanctions the scheme by order. A certified copy must be filed with the registrar of companies within 30 days, making the scheme binding on all parties. This step finalizes the merger or arrangement, ensuring legal enforceability and completion of the transaction. NCLT's role in sanctioning schemes is supervisory, not substitutive. It ensures statutory compliance, procedural fairness, and absence of fraud, but does not substitute its own commercial judgment for that of the majority of creditors or members. The Supreme Court decision in Mihir H. Mafetla v. Mafetla Industries Limited is foundational, emphasizing that the tribunal's focus is on process and legality, not commercial wisdom. Separate meetings must be held for distinct classes of members and creditors whose rights are not identical. Proper class constitution is essential, as grouping stakeholders with materially different interests can invalidate the scheme's approval. Determining what constitutes a proper class is a recurring source of litigation and an important examination topic, especially in schemes involving public and promoter shareholders. Han Scheme Sanction, Section 232(3), empowers the NCLT to transfer property liabilities and undertaking to the transferee company automatically, without further act or deed. This automatic vesting is a major advantage over itemized asset acquisitions, as contracts, licenses, and assets vest by operation of the NCLT order. However, certain sector-specific licenses may still require fresh approval or consent, so each must be checked individually. Schemes involving listed companies require additional protections under SEBI's framework. Public shareholder approval must be obtained through e-voting, with the scheme deemed approved only if more votes are cast in favor than against. Pricing and valuation safeguards prevent schemes from bypassing related party transaction or delisting regulations. SEBI circulars frequently update these requirements, so practitioners must stay current. Merger structured as a scheme of arrangement does not automatically receive tax-neutral treatment. It must satisfy conditions under Section 2(1)(b) of the Income Tax Act 1961, including transfer of all properties and liabilities and shareholder continuity. Qualifying amalgamations allow carry forward of losses and depreciation, but non-qualifying ones do not. This distinction is critical for structuring tax-efficient mergers. Demerger is the opposite of a merger. One company transfers one or more undertakings to another with shares issued to the original shareholders. Demergers are used for business separation, ring-fencing liabilities, enabling separate listing, or facilitating subsequent sales. The procedure mirrors that of mergers but focuses on dividing business lines rather than combining them. Mergers are implemented as schemes of arrangement under Sections 230-232 of the Companies Act, 2013. Tax neutrality conditions are defined under Section 219A of the Income Tax Act, 1961. These conditions ensure genuine corporate restructuring, preserve shareholder continuity, and prevent disguised sales or tax avoidance. The statutory framework provides clarity and safeguards for demerger transaction. Procedural steps for demergers mirror those for mergers: board approval, valuation, SEBI stock exchange observation if listed, NCLT application, class meetings with 3/4 value majority, NCLT sanction, and Row C filing. The scheme document must identify the undertaking being demerged, the appointed date, and the share entitlement ratio for the resulting company. Proper procedure ensures legal validity and stakeholder protection. Mergers are used for pre-sale carve-outs, group simplification, separate listing, family settlements, and regulatory separation. Pre-sale carve-outs involve separating a business division for subsequent sale, while group simplification enables independent stock exchange listing. Family settlements use demergers to divide business interests among promoter branches. Regulatory separation ring-fences regulated businesses from non-regulated activities, satisfying sectoral requirements. Section 233 of the Companies Act, 2013 introduced a simplified merger procedure for small companies, holding wholly owned subsidiaries and startup small company combinations. The fast-track route avoids full NCLT adjudication, making it ideal for low-risk, intragroup, or small company mergers. Eligibility is defined by company category, not transaction size, so large unrelated companies cannot use this route. Fast-track merger procedure involves notice to the registrar and official liquidator, approval by members holding at least 90% of shares, declaration of solvency, and filing with the central government. If no objections arise, the regional director registers the scheme and issues a confirmation order. If objections are received, the matter is escalated to the NCLT for full procedure. This route is heavily used for internal group reorganization. Fast-track mergers save time and cost for low-risk, intragroup, or small company transactions. Statutory safeguards include creditor consent thresholds, Row C/official liquidator review, and escalation to NCLT if objections arise. This route is ideal for merging dormant subsidiaries into parents where risk to third parties is minimal. Eligibility is strictly defined, preventing misuse for large or unrelated mergers. Section 234 of the Companies Act, 2013 permits mergers between Indian companies and companies in notified foreign jurisdictions. The procedure is set out in Rule 25A and the RBI's Foreign Exchange Management, Cross-Border Merger Regulations, 2018. Inbound mergers allow foreign companies to merge in Indian entities, while outbound mergers require compliance with FEMA's overseas investment rules and sectoral caps. NCLT sanction is still required, ensuring regulatory oversight. Bound mergers involve foreign companies merging in Indian companies, with RBI approval deemed granted if conditions are met. Outbound mergers involve Indian companies merging into foreign entities, subject to stricter regulation and compliance with overseas investment rules. Both types require NCLT sanction and adherence to RBI's cross-border merger framework, ensuring that sectoral restrictions and regulatory requirements are not circumvented. Reverse merger is a commercial term describing a merger where the surviving entity is a smaller or shell company, often already listed, while the operating company is the transferor. The procedure follows Sections 230-232, but the structuring achieves backdoor listing or utilizes tax attributes of the shell company. SEBI scrutinizes such schemes to prevent circumvention of IPO requirements and ensure fairness. Reverse mergers are used for backdoor listing, allowing an unlisted operating company to obtain stock exchange listing by merging into a listed shell. They also enable utilization of accumulated tax losses, subject to Section 72A conditions, and facilitate group restructuring where the listed entity's brand or licenses are valuable. SEBI imposes conditions to prevent abuse and ensure that reverse mergers meet IPO eligibility norms. Section 66 of the Companies Act, 2013 allows companies to reduce share capital with NCLT confirmation. Reduction can be achieved by extinguishing liability, canceling paid-up capital, or paying off excess capital. A special resolution and NCLT confirmation are required with notice to creditors who may object. The tribunal can direct the company to add and reduce to its name for a specified period. Capital reduction is often used in M&A and restructuring transactions. Selective reduction can buy out minority shareholders, simplify capital structure before a merger, or adjust capital after a demerger. Selective reductions targeting specific shareholders attract scrutiny for fairness and have been litigated for potential oppression. Courts and NCLT apply safeguards to ensure that reductions are not used to unfairly expropriate minority interests. Selective capital reduction targeting minority shareholders is a recurring topic for analysis. It intersects with Section 66 procedure and broader protections against oppression under Sections 241-242. Courts and NCLT scrutinize such reductions for fairness, ensuring that minority shareholders are not unfairly expropriated. Practitioners must verify case citations and apply safeguards to protect minority interests during capital reduction. Part II has provided a comprehensive doctrinal treatment of Indian M&A transaction structures, including share acquisitions, asset acquisitions, slump sales, schemes of arrangement, demergers, fast-track and cross-border mergers, and restructuring tools like reverse mergers and capital reduction. Understanding these structures is essential for navigating the legal and commercial landscape of Indian corporate transaction. The next part will delve deeper into procedural aspects and regulatory practice. Part III will explore the Companies Act, 2013 merger machinery in greater procedural depth, including NCLT practice, appellate jurisdiction, and scheme timelines. It will also cover the SEBI takeover code in detail. This knowledge builds on the transaction structures discussed in Part II, equipping viewers with a robust understanding of Indian M&A law. Stay tuned for advanced insights and practical guidance in the next installment. Conclusion: Part II of the Master Subject Treatise has equipped you with a thorough understanding of the principal transaction structures under Indian M&A law. From share and asset acquisitions to complex schemes of arrangement, demergers, fast-track and cross-border mergers, and restructuring tools, each structure presents unique legal and commercial challenges. Mastery of these concepts is vital for effective M&A practice in India. Continue your learning journey with Part III for procedural mastery and regulatory expertise.